Lawmakers have quietly voted to double the thresholds for political donations and disclosure, weakening the very transparency the Political Funding Act designed to uphold. Michael Atkins, an election analyst, has been one of the vocal watchdogs on the need for accountability in party financing, and he joins me now to unpack this development in Parliament. Michael, good to speak to you as always. Now, the ANC claims parties need more funding, but with R6.5 billion in public funds since 2020, is this justified in your view?
Hi, good afternoon. Look, that is a good question. Parliament decided that they need to pass the resolution which enables the President to set those donation limits and the reporting threshold. And the Home Affairs Portfolio Committee has drafted a motion, as you mentioned, where they will get the National Assembly to vote on the resolution and make the recommendations. Now, there wasn't, in that portfolio committee meeting on Tuesday, there wasn't any actual objective sort of means or measure for or justification for the doubling. So, for example, were they to recommend that they made the reporting threshold 100 million rand and the donation limit R1 billion, then nobody would ever know anything about any of the party funding. So any increase in the reporting threshold and that donation limit does reduce the amount that the public knows when the IEC publishes their quarterly figures on the party donations. So it is questionable because that committee didn't have any outside reason or explanation for the doubling.
Now, I'd imagine, Michael, that you've done some research or certainly had some conversations with various individuals to establish why the need for this doubling, firstly. And secondly, what are the implications of more supporters being able to donate larger amounts without being identified, publicly at least?
Well, you see, there's two concerns, okay, and they do work against each other. One is that the Concord held in 2018 that the public has a right to reasonable access to information about private funding of political parties. So if that reporting threshold goes up, the amount of information we get will go down. In other words, people can give larger amounts and stay anonymous. The parties are arguing that raising the reporting threshold will help them to get more funds. So now that's a bit of an interesting question. The parties are literally saying to us, they've got donors who don't want to be identified, who would be willing to give us 200,000 Rand, but they don't want to be identified. And we'd like to get those 200,000 from each of those anonymous donors instead of only 100,000 Rand at a time. So then this obviously raises the question, well, how many donors don't want to be identified if they've got that much money to give? Also, there are certain donors across the parties who have given large amounts, up to the limit of 15 million, to particular parties. So obviously, doubling that threshold will create the ability of some of those donors to substantially, obviously, increase the funding that those parties get. So these are questions that should be discussed. I think the main objection is that the committee didn't really give any good reason for the increase from the amount that was in operation from 2021.
Now, Michael, if as a donor you are giving 30 million to a political party, are you inclined to want to influence policy at some level? Is this a possibility? Is it something that we should be considering?
It's not even merely policy, because one of the big concerns is whether any of those donors, the reason we have the disclosure is people can investigate whether any of those donors have any other kinds of relationships, either with the party or with government itself. So the big question is, yes, policy. Secondly, whether there are any corrupt relationships that can be investigated. As to whether they do affect policy, I think the answer is mixed. And some of the time, we simply don't know. So there have been a couple of big donors, for example, who have funded some of the newer parties. Now, we simply don't know whether those donors are affecting the policy of those parties. People will deny that they do affect it, and the donors may very easily say, we just want to see democratic alternatives. We want to strengthen or create a broader democratic representation. What the actual truth is going to be difficult for us to, determine from the sidelines.
Now, the one thing that's been hot on everybody's lips is the issue around VAT and the deliberations in Parliament, where there's very too little agreement. Now, the lawmakers, as said, have quietly voted for this increase in those figures. Was it unanimous? Are they all singing out of the same hymn book?
Well, look, the VAT saga is obviously a very touchy political matter. What has essentially happened is some of the smaller parties supported the votes on Monday and Tuesday on the basis that we need a budget passed, and that first vote is essential to the whole framework of the budget. The condition was, and it will yet to be seen whether this comes true, that they would take the next few weeks to try and find a way of avoiding those increases. So yes, it is very touchy. In absolute terms, the increase in VAT is not large, the actual numbers involved. But obviously it's a highly symbolic matter and a very sensitive matter, because government people get large salaries, they get lots of perks, there's VIP protection, but the ordinary people have to bear the brunt of tax increases. So, yeah, look, that is a very tricky matter, and the politics of the parties, I think each has a different motivation for the stance that they've taken in this case.
Now, finally, how can the public stay informed and engaged on these issues that impact them and obviously impact the parliamentarians, particularly when in the ordinary day-to-day runnings, it's not something that comes their way and allows certainly their opinion to be heard?
That's an interesting question. If you go on Twitter or X now, there are certain accounts that, there's like parliamentary accounts or government department accounts that do post information. There are various NGOs. There's a group called the Parliamentary Monitoring Group who give detailed information about all committee meetings. So if you have an interest, for example, in that Home Affairs Portfolio Committee, a particular interest, you can follow that. But my answer, I call it biased answer, is, there are people on X, either official accounts or news accounts, that are posting this type of information. Yes, but then it's also up to yourselves to, to give the general public an update of what has happened.
Michael Atkins, always good to speak to you, elections analyst, just giving us his perspectives on the Political Funding Act and the fact that those numbers have quietly been increased.